If you've ever spoken on a stage in front of an audience for any type of formal event or occasion, you know that there is a setup process involved in getting ready to go out on the stage. You've got to check the mics, make sure the microphones work. You want to make sure that the lights work on the stage. You want to make sure that the light's hitting you correctly. If you have some notes, you're a little uncertain about things, make sure that your notes are displayed in such a way you can see them clearly. If you need to know what time it is, make sure there's some sort of timer out there. There's a whole bunch of things you do to set up going on the stage. That's stage setup. But before you even get to the stage, before that even happens, way before that, they're setting up the audience. And what most speakers fail to do is to set up the audience. So they'll spend a lot of time setting up the stage, getting everything ready in the stage, making sure it's all in the correct position. I mean, it's great, looks great in the stage, but because they don't set up the audience, when you get out there, they don't get the reaction they expect. You get out there and they think, they aren't getting this. They aren't liking this. They're not having a good time. This isn't quite what they expected. So the unprepared speakers, the ones who haven't bothered to set up the audience, have a great stage setup. Everything's set up perfectly, the microphones are great, the lighting's fine, but because they didn't do the audience setup, the whole thing can just fail badly. If you've ever been in a situation where you get out there and you start talking and all of a sudden you notice the audience is not only not with you, they don't like you. And the more you talk, the less they like you. Well, if you've ever been in that situation, you know you don't want to do it again. And if you haven't been in that situation, you don't want it to happen. So that's why audience setup is so very important. And once you start doing audience setup and understanding audience setup, then things start coming together. And there are three major things to do in audience setup. Each one is important and adds to your speech and builds in a little bit of a credibility and connection. Each one will help you connect a little bit better with that audience. And it's things to do before you even get to the stage. It's how you set up that audience. Stage setup is great. Audience setup is even more important. Even if you have a stage where the microphone doesn't quite work, or the lights aren't perfect, or you don't quite get the sayings you want, your things aren't quite as smooth as you want to be, if you set up the audience right, then at least you know speech is working on some level or another. So even if the stage setup doesn't go okay, as long as you get the audience set up there, it won't be a total disaster. It's so important. Once you get the audience set up, then things are a lot easier. Because you get that stage power that you've always wanted. You start to really own that stage. You take control of that stage. That's your stage out there. The audience knows it. You know it. Everybody knows it. It's your stage. Your stage to do what you want with when you get the right audience set up. You don't waste a lot of time trying to figure out, how do I connect the audience? Do I do jokes? Do I tell things or whatever? You don't have to do all of that stuff because you've done the audience setup. You've done the audience setup in advance so that get to know you time is much, much less. It's not a big deal anymore about getting to know the audience because you've done the audience setup work. It's a process. Three things to think about. Three important things to think about. Once you go through and work and do those three things, then you work through that process, then the audience will be much better. When you actually get up on stage, you'll be more confident, more assured, and you start to have fun up there, start to have a good time, because you've done the work that you know you need to do. So in the next 20 minutes or so, you're going to learn about how to do audience setup. And the thing is, many people don't understand that first thing to do with audience setup. They either don't have the time or the interest, whatever it is, they don't do it. Because they don't do it, they can lose the audience before they even start. Suddenly discovering that they have the wrong speech. Have you ever been in that situation where you're giving a speech and you realize suddenly it's the wrong speech? It's because you didn't do the audience setup. You didn't take that first important step. Once you take that, then things are easier. Then you know you've got the right speech. Then things are more comfortable up there. Then you can work your way through any problems. It's a lot easier once you take that first important step of audience setup. And that is interview. Interview. Interview your audience before you get on stage. Now, many speakers don't bother to do that. They figure, well, you know, I'm going to go out there, I know what I'm going to say, I know what I'm going to talk about, stuff that's important to me, the audience will get it. I'll just kind of bring them along with me in the speech, and that's that. Problem is, these speakers don't really understand the audience. They get out there, discover that they really don't have any sense of where the audience is going, what it's doing, then their whole speech just collapses. If you do an audience interview, you don't have that problem. Because you start to understand much better what's important to this audience you're speaking in front of. The thing that's so important to remember in speaking is that every speech is different. Because every audience is different. Even if you have a set speech you give, the way you emphasize it, different things you focus on, how you focus on those things, the examples you give, those are ways to customize that speech for that audience. And that only works if you understand that audience. So interview the audience. Now, of course, you can't interview everyone who's going to be there. If you're talking in front of 30 or 40 people, you can't have them just interview everybody. And if you're in front of thousands of people, you definitely can't interview everybody. You can interview a kind of a slice of people. Interview top management. If you're going to a business function, get a chance. Figure out how you can talk to the top people who are going to be there. Who's the highest ranked person there? And find somebody on that rank. We'll talk with you. Really explain what it is this function is about. Some of the things that have gone well in the past. Some of the things that haven't gone well in the past. Find out about taboo subjects. What things should I never bring up? You want to know what those are. Find out about what things are interesting. What things have worked. What presenters, what styles really did they like? How much humor do they want? How much seriousness? All these are things to do in the interview questions. And don't just interview top management. Interview some of the people who are just kind of in the middle. Basic people. If you're talking to a company function, just try to find some basic employees. People in kind of the middle level of things. Find out, what do they like? What are they interested in? And if you really want to test yourself and have a really great speech, find some people who don't like speeches, don't like these events, who think they're a total waste of time. Find some people like that. Talk to them. Find out, what do they hate about it? What really bothers them about it? Is there any way to get buy-in about, hey, just give me a chance on this, see how it works, and then make up your mind as you go along. So if you can get the people who are known to be anti-conference, anti-speech people, and get them on your side, that's huge. Absolutely huge. So, first thing to do in that audience setup is to make sure you have the interview. The interview alone isn't enough. There's something else you got to do to really make sure that that speech connects with that audience. interviews are important. No question about it. Interviews are important and very useful. But it's not enough just to do an interview. Because if you do just an interview, then when you get out there and you actually start giving your speech, the content may not quite work unless you do something else. Because there's a major thing going on in your speech. Major thing going on in your speech. If you don't pay attention to it, it can really derail your speech. Particularly at company functions, or if you're not speaking to a company, just a general place where you're speaking to a group of people who are a particular way. Maybe you're speaking to a bunch of lawyers, or you're speaking to a bunch of Toastmasters, or you're speaking to a bunch of NSA people. Whoever it is, there's something that's particularly important and important to understand. Once you get it, you're that much closer to really making the audience setup happen. And that second thing is language. Language. Every organization, every group, every collection of people has their own way that they talk, their own special way they talk, their own special way they do things. And if you go up there and you talk in your own way, in your own way of doing things, and you're way over here, it's completely different from the way they handle things, they'll listen to you. But they won't really make that connection, because it'll be very clear, I'm over here, I'm on the outside, and you've got your kind of big group over here, and you're doing things differently. What will unite you and your audience is if you can understand and speak their language. If they've got jargon that they use, understand a little bit about that jargon, how that jargon works. Now, it's not to say that you can just go in there and just pretend that you do their job as well as they are and you know everything about it. That's not the issue. The issue is in speaking their language. If you make the effort to speak their language, they'll appreciate it. Find out about what they call things. They call, if you're speaking to consultants, they call them projects, they call them jobs, they call them works. What do they call it? Find out. Language. Language is very important because language is how people communicate. So if you communicate in a language that really relates well to them, then automatically they'll kind of buy into what you're saying, because they'll say, well, you're not one of us, but you understand a little bit about us. And that puts you way past most speakers we've had who just don't get us at all. So already there'll be people who don't speak the language, and those are the outsiders. At least you're not an outsider. You're someone who gets the language, who understands how that language works. Your audience will think, well, I know what this guy's talking about, because it's what I live every day. So that relates to me. That makes sense. I'm going to give him a chance. I'm going to give him a chance because I get that language. Powerful thing in setting up the audience is getting that language right. Now, again, of course, be careful about language. You have language, too much jargon thrown in there, and if you really don't use it well and don't understand it, well, that's really bad. So when you use language and use jargon, whatever it is, understand the jargon that people use and how they use it. And that's something you can think about in your interviews. When you get up there and you start giving your speech, throw in some of that language. You talk about projects. I know I've been working on some projects. Talk about work. I've been working on some works. Call it jobs. I know I'm doing some jobs. Just hearing that familiar language, the language that your audience hears day after day after day, hearing you, the speaker, say that, will help make that connection, that audience connection. It's really powerful. Once you use the right language, then you start to take even more control of the stage. Quickly you're making that audience connection. It's a simple thing. Use the language, and you'll feel more comfortable. You feel your audience relax, you'll start to relax. Language is very important. So once you have the interview and you have the language, you're missing one little thing, one very important thing, that really make that audience setup, really make that audience connection happen. The next thing is something that most speakers don't get, because it takes a little bit of work. It takes a little bit more than just interviewing. It takes a little bit of talking to, and most importantly, listening to those people in the interviews. Most speakers don't do that, and as a result, their speeches in front of the people I talk to are okay, but really aren't as good as they could be. The audience thinks, it's okay, but it's not really that great. Those speakers who do make the extra effort and do this third thing, those speakers come a long way. They make that strong audience connection. They make a powerful impression. They get called back to work over and over again. And people leave thinking, it was good. It was a good speech. I learned something, I liked it. Because it's a very important thing to do. Once you do it, then all of a sudden, you go out there and the audience is really riveted on you, really paying attention to you. Like you're special. You're powerful and in charge. That way you're special. You're powerful and in charge. And that connection starts to happen. Simple process to work through. Becomes a lot more enjoyable. Once you understand how to tell a story. A story. Great to have the interviews. Interviews give you basics of what's going on. Language is very important, but without a story, the whole thing falls apart. You can use examples, but examples tell, stories sell. And if you can have a story from somebody in your audience about something that happened to them and that they went through, that's powerful. So tell stories about the events that happened to your audience. Your audiences did. Your audience know. Your audience understand. Tell stories about those top-ranked people that they respect. Tell stories that help connect, get your point across. Whatever speech you're giving about, whatever point it is, find a story in that audience that underlines that point. Really makes that point clear. People hear the story and say, I get it. I get it. Stories are powerful. And stories also require you to listen. You must listen. You don't ask questions during a story, you just listen. Tell me a story about a time when you achieved something really wonderful for the company. After you ask that question, shut up and listen. Listen to that story. When they tell it, get the person's name, find out some more details, flesh it out a little bit, and you've got a great story. You don't just stop with one. Find out more. When you're interviewing people, get their stories. It's not just the facts, as feigned by Joe Friday of the TV show Dragnet, the police TV show Dragnet. It's not about just the facts. It's about just the stories. Stories. Setting up the audience. Setting up in advance some really great stories that engage, connect, interest, pull people in. Stories that are relevant to their life, told in their way, with their language, coming out of these interviews. That's where everything comes together in that powerful story. As mentioned, not just one, many stories you can get. Find some stories, find out what the stories are, get them, and then everything starts to happen. And the audience sees, hey, you're good. You're good. I feel that. I really feel that thing going on here. I feel that connection happening. Yeah. Interview, language stories, most important stories, and then it becomes enjoyable, fun time on stage. So, remember, importance, stories. the audience, you want to do three things. First thing is interview. Interviews are powerful because an interview will give you a chance to really get to know those people in your audience. Interview people at the top level if you can, if you're in a corporate situation. Or if just a general audience, just interview different types of people. Talk to the meeting planner, find out, hey, who's going to be out there? And then see if you can interview some of the people who are going to attend, who want to attend. Interview. Then you'll understand a little bit about what they're doing, how they're acting. You'll get a really kind of background, a feel for this particular audience. After the interview, make sure you use the right language. Language is powerful. After all, language is the way that humans communicate with humans. The language you use determines the effectiveness of the speeches you give. When you're using languages, use language that these people are familiar with, that your audience knows and understands. If there is jargon that's understood amongst this audience, this whole audience, know the jargon and use it well. And when you're using language, make sure you use the right language, the right situation. You look stupid if you use a lot of language that has nothing to do with their situation out there. Use the right language, even the right jargon, and everybody out there gets it, and you're speaking something they know about, think about, do every day. That's powerful. It's a simple thing you can do to set up that audience before you even get out there doing that speech. Understand their language. And then finally, the stories. Don't forget the stories. Remember the stories. Remember the stories. Examples tell, stories sell. Find the stories of the audience. What is the story about how somebody first came to this company? What's a story about what somebody did that they're really proud of? It's a story that really transforms somebody's life. Find out the story and listen. When you're doing those interviews, listen. Get the story. Put the story in the right language. Pull the story out of the interview. The goal is to get that story down. A powerful, engaging story that really gets people involved. When you do all that, the stage is yours. The stage is absolutely yours. People will see somebody who gets them, who understands them, somebody who's ready before they even stepped out on that stage. Somebody who's ready before even they were adjusting the lights or adjusting the microphones or any of that. They knew what they were doing. And that will be you. You will know what you're doing. You'll be on charge on that stage. The audience will know it the moment you step foot on that stage. And it's a simple thing to do. So you use your time well. Use your time well before you get up there on stage. Takes a little longer to do. But it is so powerful and so effective and such a better way of spending your time than just going over your set speech for the umpteenth time. Instead of that, interview, get the language, get the stories. Much better use of your time. And that's really the process. Interview. When you're interviewing, understand what that language is. The language is get those stories out of people. Get the stories and make sure the stories happen. That's what's really going to make your speech go. That simple process of interview, language, and stories. And then, enjoy. Your audience will be having a good time. You'll be having a good time. You'll feel comfortable, at ease. It'll be simple up there. And just feel that everything just flows nicely and gradually. No pressure, all the pressure lifted off. Just complete comfortable feeling up there. So when you're going out there and you're setting up for your speech, trying to make sure the microphones are right, the lights are right, and all those things are in the right place, don't forget, before that even happens, make sure you set up the audience right. Set up the audience by doing interviews with that audience, getting the right language, telling powerful stories. Set up the audience, and you'll set yourself up for a great speech.